Hello and welcome to another episode of the F1 Hour with my friend and yours, the goatiest of all F1 minds to have ever goated, the one that they call Peter D. Windsor. How are you doing, good sir?
I'm very well, Cameron. Yeah, been trying to get on the right time zone for all these races. I'm not quite sure what that means, really. I've been getting up early in the morning and then, I don't know, staying up late at night, and that's about it. So I'm slightly groggy, but no, yeah, I'm all right.
It's chaos.
Thank you very much. How are you?
I'm good. Better than I deserve, Peter. Better than I deserve. Should we talk about some F1 as the ticker?
Yeah, why not? Why not?
As is customary, Peter, what do you think was the biggest story to come out of the Grand Prix weekend, the US COTA this weekend just passed?
Well, I think in a nutshell, despite not having the best car of the weekend, because I think that was the McLaren Mercedes, Max Verstappen made it look easy with 2 poles, sprint win and a Grand Prix win. What more can you do? Didn't set fastest lap. Okay, set 3rd fastest lap. He still won the race, not being the quickest guy on the circuit. It's amazing, isn't it? But that's how good he was, and that's how good the McLaren was. And Max is, I think we said a couple of live streams ago, I think I said, or maybe with you, that Max is actually getting better virtually all the time now, isn't he? It's just like, it's an exponential thing now with Max. And in Austin, we saw him in qualifying, or in sprint qualifying, we saw how quick he was through fast corners with the tailwind when everybody else was a little bit nervous because they didn't have as much downforce as the rear as normal. And then in actual qualifying, we saw how he adapted to the different wind variables coming into play, and he thought about the lap, and he got all 3 sectors about right, as distinct from just 2 sectors, which was the case for everybody else. That was a thinking Max, well, thinking Red Bull as well. And then the way he drove both races, concentration levels, because it's not, as I said in my video last night, Jim Clark always said concentration. We call it focus today, I suppose, thanks to Ayrton. Concentration is very underplayed, and it's not really talked about in the same way as physiology and strategy and all the other things, but it is absolutely important. And when you're battling with somebody, as say Charles and Norris were, and Lando, concentration is not an issue because you're just focusing on what's going on around you and how you're going to try and pass or defend. But when you're on an open track pulling away, and you got another 50 laps to go and you got clean air, that's when it's not a problem, but that's when we need to again think, wow, this guy's good. I mean, he's the repetition of his lap times and the lack of small errors were just incredible to me. And that was a wonderful performance in so many ways. 3, just to say there.
Peter, what do you say to those naysayers who say that Max Verstappen is a fast car merchant, that now that he's got himself a car, you would expect, therefore, him to be, if he's even half good, you would expect him to be dominating the field as he has done over the past five rounds. By the way, 119 points over the past 5 rounds in the drivers is equal to what Lando and Oscar have scored.
Well, I think basically they're right. If you drive that well in a bad car, when you get the good car, you're just gonna take off, aren't you? And look at Nigel Mansell, very good example. And that's the same with Max this year. But it doesn't take into account the effect that he's having on his nearest opposition. McLaren, good example, who have kind of fallen into the default phrase now of, well, we got the best from the car. That was about the best we were going to do today. We didn't think we could take it to Max. We haven't heard that for a while from McLaren, and it's like their sort of standard thing now, isn't it? And to achieve that is actually as big an achievement as being quick and winning the race. Because it's one thing to do that. It's another to nullify the opposition. And I still maintain the McLaren was the better car for the Austin Grand Prix weekend, restarting on Friday morning, learning from everything that happened. In retrospect, McLaren would probably go out and be right there with Max, if not ahead of him. But because they're not as good as Red Bull, not as good as Max in terms of the drivers, they didn't. And that should not be underplayed. In any estimation of how good a job Max is doing, you should never underplay the way he's beating the opposition as well.
Go on then, Peter. Let's double click on that for a second, because we talked almost in perpetuity about what it is very specifically that Max done well. Some say that, or does so well, different to the rest. What's the source of his genius, apart from the ability to balance the car on and around the limits of adhesion, the metronomic focus and concentration, the fact that he doesn't make any mistakes? Why can Max almost make the impossible look so routine at this stage?
Because I think, without thinking about it, Max, from a very early age, knew that he could do this thing pretty well. He could compare himself with others and see that he usually beat them. And he could feel that most of the decisions he took about setup, strategy, how to drive the car, what tire pressures were, most of them kind of worked. And so the whole thing just gelled for him at a very early age. And the great thing about Max is he's never allowed that bubble of brilliance to explode or expand or change shape even. It's just something that's there, that he's looked after, and he lives a life that protects that. He doesn't go crazy when he wins a race. He doesn't do a million interviews and get on the front cover of Vogue or whatever. He just becomes Max Verstappen. And his demeanor 2 hours after a race is the demeanor of a guy that's just won a kart race at Genk. He's not walking around as if he's, one of the greatest guys on the planet. And that's why he kind of differs, I think, a lot from the Netflix, the premiere of the movie stuff, because he just doesn't want that. And he can probably sense, without thinking about it, that it's not good for him. It's not good for his psyche. And I don't want, that's obviously quite deep and complicated already, but we shouldn't go that much further. All you can really say is he's got this natural feel for doing it well. I think Lewis had that for a long time. I think it's kind of changed over the last, I don't know, probably it's difficult to put a number on the years, but because of his background, because of the way his career has gone, he has become much more of a global star than Max will ever want to be. And that has had its effect on Lewis, for sure. But I don't think Max will ever allow that to happen. I think he'll just be a racer, pure and simple. A little bit like Kimi, but yeah, pretty much like Kimi, to be honest, except that Kimi had distractions away from racing, which detuned him, whereas I don't think Max allows that to happen either. I mean, what's he going to be doing on a Monday or a Tuesday? He's going to be gaming, or he's going to be watching the highlights of the World Rally Championship from, whatever. He's just going to be doing his normal things. And I think that's the reason he's able to keep it that way.
Peter, do you think Max can win the championship? Because a lot's been made. He's now 40 points adrift, whereas a couple of weeks ago he was 104 points. Over the past 4 weekends, he's eaten into Oscar Piastri's lead in the drivers to the tune of 64 points with 5 races to remaining. Where are you putting your money, Peter?
Well, I did say before the season started that I thought he would win the Drivers' Championship, so I have to stand by that, and I still think I'm not saying he will, but I still think he's got a really good chance. I think most of it depends on what happens at McLaren. And as I said at the end of my video, they're not making it easy for themselves, because quite clearly now, Max is a driver contender for the championship. There's no two ways about it. And normally in that situation, if McLaren are the team that producing the driver that Max has to beat, that team would then be focused on the driver. It'd be James Hunt. It wouldn't be Jochen Mass. But they can't do that. They've shown, they've proven, and absolutely for sure it will continue, that they're trying to be glad, happy around both drivers and look after them both and just see what happens magically. In the meantime, you've got this sort of laser beam of Max Verstappen, and they're not countering it with the laser beam of their own. And that's the problem McLaren have got now. And it's the problem that goes back, as I said, from the millisecond they signed Oscar Piastri, that they were never, ever going to be able to solve. And whilst you can talk a lot about, well, what should they do? Should they favor Oscar, favor Lando? How do they? The reality is they should have kept Daniel Ricciardo, and it should be Lando Norris, Daniel Ricciardo. And if they did that, Lando Norris right now would have more points than he has. And he'd be in a much stronger position to beat Max, and McLaren would be. But because they decided to go with a very, very quick, another Australian, Oscar Piastri, we can see what's happened. I predicted long before the season, long before Oscar's first race, that it would end in tears at some point. They would run into one another at the first corner of a race. Okay, it was only a sprint race, but it's happened as predicted, and it won't go away now. No way.
Let's double click on that incident, Peter. Many Oscar Piastri fans have said that now, because you've got all this repercussions, and Lando is the prodigal son, and he's the one that represents McLaren on the Ralph Lauren shoots and British Vogue and all this stuff, that he's the favoured one, and this will be at some point impacting Oscar to the downside. You'll have seen the stats that the first 9 races he won 5 races and 4 poles, and then the subsequent 10 it's like 2 and 1, nowhere near that. All of a sudden Oscar Piastri's performance has dropped off of a cliff. What do you make of Oscar's drop in form? Mark Webber says that he can still drive a car, that he's no different, but the stats say something very different to Mark's supposition though.
Well, I think most of it is Oscar's own making, brought about from Baku. And, that was a race he could have been right up there with Lando. He could have beaten Lando. He could have won that race, actually. And he didn't. He had a terrible weekend from beginning to end. And as Mark Webber said afterwards, he's only human, these things happen. So when you say that and things like that have happened, the implication is that, well, next race it's going to be okay again. And it wasn't. The problem is that we then got into the Singapore situation with McLaren going down that fatuous Christian Horner route of race closely but don't touch one another. And Oscar, from his perspective now, I'm only saying it from his perspective, expected Lando to fall in behind him going into turn 1 in Singapore. And Lando didn't. He went down the inside. And Oscar then had to make room for Lando. And Lando then misjudged the closing speed with Max, hit Max, and Oscar then had to run very wide, almost into the wall, to avoid the whole thing. So from Oscar's point of view, Lando had broken the intra-team rules and there was no penalty within the team for what he did. What effect would that have on Oscar? Would he just be able to blank it out and drive a brilliant race thereafter and beat Lando to the flag in Singapore? On the contrary, he went into a different mode altogether. And it's the mode he's in now, which is, I don't feel comfortable with this. I'm not getting the best from the car. The car doesn't feel right. I don't feel comfortable sharing all the information. I'm only making things up that potentially could be the case, giving all this information to Lando. And it's become a problem because he drove incredibly badly all weekend in Indianapolis. So, if you reflect back to Baku, and he's only human, it's just one race, basically he drove in US Grand Prix in Austin, basically in the fallout from Baku still. And that's the problem with Oscar. He's got this, I don't know whether it's some sort of side of his character where when he feels as if he's being slighted, he really gets down about it and he isn't able to just shrug it off, or whether it's because of what's happened, he's unable to get the setup that he needs on the car because there's a communication block going on within the team now, that he can't express himself in a way that he could before. All of which comes down to Zach Brown deciding to put these two guys together in the first place. As I say, if you want to say whose fault was it turn 1 in the sprint race in Austin, I'll tell you now, it was Zach Brown's fault. If that had been Lando Norris and Daniel Ricciardo, and Daniel had made a pretty good start from the clean side of the road and he was alongside him, but with all this traffic around, and ultimately he knew always that it was Lando's team and Lando was the chosen one for the championship, I can tell you now, Daniel would have just filtered in and done the right thing. He wouldn't have tried to do an undercut, or whatever you want to call it, an up and under on Lando. But Oscar did. Because of everything that had happened, he thought, right, stuff it, I'm going to go for the inside now. And that's the problem. And that's not, he's a racer, and if you're hiring drivers, you have to look at the personality of the driver. You have to look at the way they are. And I can't imagine that they didn't hire Oscar thinking this guy's a serious racer, and if we rub him up the wrong way, he's going to get pretty fiery, because that's the way he is. He's always been like that. So how did they not know that? Yeah. Why did they put him alongside Lando is the next question. I still keep saying this is the problem. It's a bit like Ferrari not hiring Adrian Newey when they had the chance. Why did McLaren break up that relationship, that great pairing between Lando and Daniel Ricciardo?
I suppose they'd argue that Danny Rick was falling off ever so slightly.
Good. That's exactly what you want. You want a Sergio Perez alongside your Max Verstappen when you're trying to win a championship with Max. Exactly what you want. I'm not talking about Daniel as he was when he was going well at Red Bull, blowing away Sebastian Vettel. I'm talking about Daniel as he was in 2024. That would have been the perfect number 2 for Lando without having to call him a number 2. That's the problem.
Peter, let me ask you about the switchback, because a lot's been made of this, because normally Oscar's very forensic, let's say, in terms of his car placement. You'll recall the overtake on Charles Leclerc at Baku last year, the one around chicane number 2, the Italian Grand Prix. He's almost eerily precise, and yet we see in the sprint that Oscar's now trying a switchback into turn 1, lap 1, where as a prerequisite of a switchback, pulling it off successfully is knowing that you've got a bit of space in front and a bit of space behind. But is this concerning as far as Oscar Piastri's chances? Because it feels like it's no longer anomalous as far as his underperformance. This is becoming the trend, Peter.
Well, yeah, of course it wasn't a particularly clever move to pull off with the pack behind you and around you. But 2 points about that. One, it wasn't illegal by the sporting code. That's the first point. That's why he didn't get a penalty. And secondly, if Singapore hadn't happened, I don't believe he would have done that. And so you'd say, oh, well, he's the guy driving the car. He's the guy that did the switchback, did the up and under. But if you, as I just said, if you wind him up enough, he's going to start doing things like that because he's a racer. And I can think of several other drivers that would have done the same thing in the same situation. Yeah. And, he could have got away with it. He could well have got away with it. He had a reasonable amount of free space around him. The problem was Fernando going down the inside and actually basically asking with his body language, Nico Hülkenberg to give him room. And that's the problem. And so we shouldn't just see Oscar's move in isolation. You should see it compound. Yeah, you could say, well, if Fernando hadn't done that, he would have got away with it. And if Nico hadn't been there, he would have got away with it. And Oscar, we know what the visibility is like on those cars. But yeah, as I said before, if Daniel Ricciardo was in the other car, I don't think he would have done that. I think he would have just dutifully sat behind Lando and made it safe. But, you hire an Oscar Piastri and then you have problems like Singapore. What do you expect? That's all I'm saying, and shame on McLaren if they didn't predict that something like that was going to happen anyway, going into the first corner of the sprint race, one on the dirty side of the grid, one on the clean side. What did they think was going to happen? Did they say to them, look, you may well find yourself on the outside of Lando going in alongside him, Oscar. If you do that, whatever you do, don't start doing the switchback thing. Just stay there, stay on your line and keep everybody safe. I wonder if anybody had that conversation with him, thought it through before the start of the sprint race. It wasn't difficult to predict. We were talking about it, potential for that. I was also talking about the potential for Fernando Alonso to do what he did. That's a classic Fernando thing. Why did nobody predict that either? Yeah. That he was going to be doing that. Was Nico Hülkenberg ready for that? I don't know. Probably not. And so it all comes down to thinking things through. And I think it looks as if because of this situation and so many people making comments about McLaren now and about Lando and about Oscar, that McLaren aren't thinking clearly.
No.
Not that they ever thought clearly in the first place, because if they had, they wouldn't have put Lando and Oscar together. So, but they're making it more difficult for themselves now. And there's no clear management there that appears to be, understanding how to control the situation.
No. And again, it was a matter of when and not if, some say, Peter. I wanna pick your brain on the so-called repercussions about which Lando spoke, because going into the race weekend, a lot was made of them evening out what Lando did in the prior race, right? The cheeky love tap. And Lando said in the pre-race scrum that there were going to be repercussions for him between now and the end of the season. Now, some speculate that could be that Oscar, between now and race 24, will have priority as far as when he comes out in qualifying. Do you think, Peter, that's commensurate? Do you think that's McLaren being even-handed for once, or do you think that's them still meddling unnecessarily in the competitive landscape of the Drivers' Championship?
I don't think that's what Lando meant. I think what Lando meant was on track, he's going to have a lot of problems with Oscar Piastri now. I think that's what he meant. If they're battling with one another and it's pretty clear that one of them's on older tyres and it's Oscar in front, normally Oscar might be told to let Lando pass. Now, Lando cannot count on Oscar doing that. I think that's what he's talking about. And he's right to say that. He is absolutely right to say that. And don't forget, we've also got Max Verstappen saying he ain't going to forget what Lando did to him in qualifying in Singapore either. And Oscar's ahead on points. So, Lando knows it's going to get fragile towards the end of the year. And yeah, at least he's admitting to it. I thought it was quite, is churlish the right word? Probably cheeky is a better word. When he said, I think he was asked after was it before the Grand Prix? I don't know when it was, but somebody said, what do you think about the first corner after what happened in the sprint? And he said, what you mean, hopefully nobody hits me. Well, no, he said, I've got to make sure nobody hits me. That's right. There's a sort of slight to Oscar there, wasn't it? But of course, and he said that with his usual, cheeky grin. But of course, the reality is he has never, I guess, been a student of the sport and understood that the way Alain Prost began to win his world championships was to learn from Niki Lauda in 1984 about how not to get run into at the first corner. And as a result of that season Prost then had, he became a second Lauda clone of never being run into at the first corner. And that's, would Lando know that? Has he watched all those races, the first corners of all those races, to see how Niki did it and then how Prost did it? Because that's what he needs to do. And I don't think he's doing that. I think he's just going and thinking, I'm Lando Norris, Oscar better not hit me, sort of thing, without reading body language, understanding where people might go and thinking through the first corners. He needs to do that, just as he needs to think about his side of the garage and get rid of all the social media. But of course, he's never going to do that. But he certainly, between now and the end of the year, if he wants to win the World Championship, he needs to become the best driver on the grid at never being hit at the first corner. Because he's a target now, I can tell you that.
Let's talk about Lando, Peter. Because again, the community is quite divided on Mr. Norris. Some love him. Some think he's a brilliant driver. That when he's had his Weetabix, that there's not too many, not named Max, that can live with Lando. And I don't necessarily disagree with that. But there's a problem as far as purists are concerned, like you've alluded to, that Lando almost writes checks with his mouth that his ASS cannot cash. You'll recall that he said to Lewis, it's easy to win races and championships, therefore, when you have the quickest car. And people are like, well, what happened to that, Lando? Lando said last year about next year, this year, that next year will be my year. Zach Brown said you've had the Senna era, you've had the Schumacher era, there was the Hamilton era, and this is the Lando Norris era. I heard a friend say that about Lando, that he thinks Lando thinks that he's better than he is. Is Lando's, is the problem that the hurdle over which Lando needs to overcome, is it all in here, Peter? If he sorts out his mental and kind of focuses like you've encouraged him to do you think the championship's his to lose?
Well, he needs to think about those first corners. That's the first thing. But getting to your point, I don't think it's in his head. I think it's all in his hands and his feet and his feel. And he's a long corner driver. That's the problem. He's a very, very good long corner driver. Not as good as Tom Price or Ronnie Peterson or Jochen Rindt, or probably even as Carlos Sainz, to be honest. But he is a long corner driver. And we saw that graphically yesterday in his battle with Charles Leclerc. And if you want to know why Lando has ups and downs and why he has issues, just look at the replays of Leclerc versus Lando. We're coming into the second last corner, the corner where you're most likely to get a track limits problem. Charles was getting 8 times out of 10 was getting a perfect rotation, giving him a lovely straight exit so that he could actually position himself correctly as he was going over the curbs with the minimum amount of lateral load on the car, obviously with some. but he was never in danger really of going over the track limits. Whereas Lando, because of his long corner, has to come out with the power on sooner. He has more load on the car. And because he's not Superman, he's going to make mistakes. He's going to overload it. The tires are going to go off. The soft tires are going to go off more than the mediums. There are going to be a lot of other variables. The wind's going to come into play, and he's going to make mistakes. You know, he was 3 strikes on that. That is not good enough for a driver who wants to win a world championship. That is the problem. And so you'll have so many people saying, oh, well, his attitude here and this and that, and when he's on his day, he's brilliant, blah, blah, blah. I don't buy that. When he's on his day, he's as good as Peter Revson. And that's saying something, because Peter Revson was very, very good. I wouldn't have said he was ever as good as Francois Seber, for example. He's good, but he's a long corner driver who makes mistakes and thinks the wrong way quite often, and he's distracted. So there's a lot of things there that are not right for Lando. If he's got a very, very good car, yeah, of course he's got a lovely touch. He's got a lovely smooth touch, and he can gets into a rhythm really well. But so do 150 other drivers in the history of the sport. You know, there's nothing that special about being that good. I'm talking about, if you want to take the race to Max Verstappen, you've got to change your game. And just look at how well Charles drove in a bad car yesterday. I mean, that Ferrari is nothing like as good as a McLaren. And look at the job Charles Leclerc did yesterday. Just superb. Only because he's a short corner driver and knows how to rotate the car and knows exactly what he's doing at any given moment, and gives himself a nice big sweet spot with which to manipulate all the variables coming into play. Whereas Lando's on the absolute edge based on performance level he's got. I mean, what was he doing going so quickly after his pit stop on soft tyres? Why was he pushing so hard? It was very clear. Well, clear for all those that did the sprint race. Obviously, I'm exaggerating because they didn't run the softs, but it was pretty clear by then that the soft was a fragile tyre. If you wanted to do the medium soft thing, you're always going to have to be tiptoeing the last few laps of the race. And yet there he was, absolutely thrashing the tyres and not, having to back away for 5-6 laps to cool them down. And then it was all too late. And the same in the first stint, graining on the left front. What was that all about? Why was he slowing down for 3 or 4 laps because of that? We all know graining is not a major issue. We all know that it's a rear limited circuit, Austin. And how many laps did he spend pussyfooting around that? You think Max was doing that? No way. Okay, admittedly, yeah, Max had the sprint race data, which Lando didn't, but, he's been around long enough to know what graining's all about. And that's just all these little details. It's just all these details, plus he's a long corner driver. I mean, I couldn't believe what he was doing at the hairpin when he was chasing Charles. He was going in he's going in wide, and like Max, and Charles, he wasn't going down to any sort of apex. But then instead of straightening the car and getting a lovely straight exit, he was getting the power on really early and running wide with power on to the exit curb. What was that all about? Because he can't help himself. That's the way he's always driven. And I suppose the last point to make is that he spends all these laps behind Charles, which is a bit like, the professor in front of the student in the classroom. Was he paying attention actually to what the professor was saying and doing with his car? Or was he just thinking, oh, well, he's in a Ferrari, he's driving it differently? Probably the latter, I suspect, which is a great shame because he's got the physical, natural feel and talent to do a lot of things. As I say, this is Peter Revson adapted his driving, and Francois Seber, but I don't think it's going to happen. Particularly now in the vortex of a championship, he's going to go to all the things that he's always done that have worked for him in the past. And who knows, he may luck into it and win the championship. Oscar may have 5 engine blow-ups and Max may have 1,000,000 problems and Lando will breeze through and win the championship. Anything could happen, obviously. Yeah. But he's not making it easy for himself, that's for sure.
No, he's not a line of least resistance type
guy. No, and I don't think he's, to say he's not in the same class as Max Verstappen as a driver or Charles Leclerc, and we saw that yesterday.
Fair cop. I can hear Lando Norris fans. If I push back on you ever so slightly, though, Peter, I can hear my Lando Norris fan mates telling me, what are you talking about, Cameron? Lando's doing his thing his way. He doesn't want to be anything other than himself. That he did well yesterday, that ultimately his objective is to close the gap to Oscar Piastri and the drivers, and he did that, now stands at 14 points. That Lando's just... my friends would say to me, Cameron, just allow Lando to sprout his wings and do it all his own way. That it's not only one personality type that's ever won a drivers' championship, and that I need to extend him a bit more grace. To that, Peter, you respond how, sir?
Well, I wasn't talking about his personality then. I was talking about his actual physical talent and the way he drives the car. That's what I'm talking about. Doesn't matter what personality you've got. Doesn't change the difference between a short corner driver and a long corner driver. His personality's okay. I mean, he's talking about Lando fans. I'm a Lando fan, have been for many years, but I'm frustrated that he's not getting any better. And it's not good enough if you're trying to win a world championship to say, oh, he did a good job yesterday, he finished second ahead of Oscar. He got blown away by Max Verstappen in a Red Bull that was arguably as good as a McLaren, probably not as good as a McLaren. And you've got to try and win every race. And to finish second was poor, I thought, because he could have won that race. Yeah. He didn't qualify well for the sprint. He should have been on the pole. He should have been on the pole for both races. The car was that good, and he wasn't. And had he qualified on the pole for the sprint, he probably wouldn't have had that shunt with Oscar, and he would have won the sprint or finished second. And then he would have had more data, and he might have taken the race to Max, because that Red Bull was pretty fragile at the end. The tyres were going off quite badly, more than they would have on the McLaren if the McLaren hadn't been driven the way Lando drove it against Charles. And so I would look back at that weekend and say that was an opportunity lost, as distinct from a great weekend where he got points gained from Oscar. I mean, that's just puerile, isn't it?
Very well said, sir. Very well said. Go on then, let's talk about Charles Leclerc, because again, it felt like a typical Charles Leclerc weekend. It was mistake laden. Like he was spinning the car, and then all of a sudden in the race he comes alive and holds off Lando for as near as it makes no difference. The race end tyre. Talk to me about Charles Leclerc's performance. Did you think, Peter, that he was a worthy driver of the day performance?
Absolutely. Well, I'm not a fan of these driver of the day performances, because how could Max not be driver of the weekend, driver of the day, driver of the lap, driver of the minute? He was. But yeah, Charles was superb yesterday. It all changed for Charles in Q3 with the wind, which a lot of drivers complained about. And it seemed like the more they took away the downforce from the back of the Ferrari and the more unstable they made the rear, the better Charles got, because suddenly he had a front end he could drive with. Yeah, the rear was all over the place. I think that spin coming out of the last corner was, I don't know, was it cold tyres? Not cold, but the tyres went fully up to temperature. It didn't look like a sort of a proper spin at high speed, did it? Or on the limit. To me, it didn't anyway. But yeah, throw the variables at Charles, take away some of the rear downforce, give him a front end again, which he hadn't had all weekend, and all of a sudden he's going to be mighty. He was unbelievably quick through turns 3, 4, and 5. And I thought, wow, this is Charles Leclerc again. That was a brilliant qualifying performance. And from there, it was, I mean, he knew that he was going to be struggling to beat George Russell, probably, unless he did something a little bit different. And I really applaud the team and Charles for doing that, going on the soft, because there wasn't a lot of downside. Unlike Max's absurd choice in Singapore, there was virtually no downside because it was so closely matched to the medium. And the upside was, back into the race when he could be fighting with other drivers, he was going to be on the medium and not having to worry about the soft. So, and it was fairly logical that he would try and get some decent grip off the line as well. And it all worked for him. It worked perfectly for him. And my only the only thing that confused me a little bit was why his tyres went off so much at the back end of the race. But then again, it just showed how bad the Ferrari was, really, and how good the McLaren was. And for him to have led Lando for so many laps was just outstanding. Absolutely outstanding. And again, it's a different sort of concentration. Max's concentration on an empty track is one thing. If you're Charles Leclerc and you've got this guy with this big DRS effect behind in a very good car, to be as pin sharp as he was under braking and positioning the car was another case study on how to do it. I've always said this guy is right up there with Max in terms of his physical talent. Very different approach to racing, different emotionally, different backgrounds, everything else. But in terms of his physical talent, he's somewhere near Max. And that we saw that yesterday. It was just wonderful to see.
What's the move then? If you're head of Team Leclerc, Peter, going into 2026 and shortly thereafter 27, what's the play? Do you extend more patience to Scuderia Ferrari, notwithstanding the fact that they keep underperforming, that they don't give either one of Lewis or Charles the car that they need and their talents deserve? Or do you look to pastures and you potentially Aston Martin, potentially Mercedes or Red Bull? Do you think it's time for Charles to stop with the I want to win a championship with Ferrari and just focus on winning a championship full stop?
I don't think I mean, if he says, I want to win a championship with Ferrari, it's only because it's his current team. But the reality is he wants to win a championship. He wants to win a bunch of championships. He doesn't care which car he's in. But as I said before, where else could he have gone all these years apart from staying where he is? And there is nowhere else that he could have gone. And I've said before, 26, nobody knows what's going to be the situation. But absolutely, without any doubt at all, he'll be on everybody's shopping list. So if the Ferrari is a terrible car and it's getting blown away and it's more or less the same as this year's season, he will have 4 or 5 teams all offering him drives for 27. No doubt about that. And if one of them is a good team with a good, good engine, everything, good chassis, he will go there for sure. I don't think he's got any loyalty to winning for Ferrari. Of course, he'd love to win for all the people that have been around him for so long. I'm not saying that, but I'm just saying that if at the end of 26, for whatever reason, Mercedes offer him a drive or Red Bull offer him a drive, he's going to take it. No doubt. Why wouldn't he? He wants to win. And I'd love to see him in a winning car consistently. Well, we've seen him in a winning car before, and he's a joy to watch. And it will be again. And it was interesting, wasn't it, when Lewis looked good on the Friday and pretty good Saturday-ish, but as qualifying developed with the win being a factor, Lewis wasn't quite there with Charles. Charles went a little bit deeper, although Lewis was very quick through those fast S's. Got to give him credit for that. But there were little areas where Charles was still getting in a little bit earlier, using the front a little bit better than Lewis. And then in the race, the back end of the race, you would have thought Lewis was going to be strong, but he wasn't. He went away and had quite a disappointing second half of the race, didn't he, on the medium tire? And that was on the soft tire. And that was, I don't know what that was. I can only assume that the car was a bit pointy for Lewis now in those conditions. And don't forget, the wind changed from Saturday to Sunday. And maybe that worked for Charles in terms of giving him more front end. And maybe that's what Lewis didn't like.
Go on then, Peter, since you bring up Sir Lewis Hamilton's name. Again, this is a tale of two cities as far as the community's opinion. Some will say that Lewis is, in terms of absolute speed, that he's never been closer season to date than he is now versus Charles. That earlier on in the season, it was the gap between them was routinely like 2 to 3 tenths. Now in qualifying, it's like it's less, it's a tenth or less, and that Lewis is now playing his way into the Scuderia Ferrari crease. However, some are saying that this is, he's a million miles away in the driver's standings, isn't he? It's like, well, there you go, 50 points now is the delta. And if Sir Lewis is the fire-breathing dragon Sir Lewis, the 2007, 2008 Sir Lewis, I don't think the points gap would be anywhere near 50 points between him and Charles. What do you think? How do you characterise this first season for Sir Lewis at the Scuderia?
Very difficult, and a very difficult car to drive for Lewis, for sure. And I think, it's no doubt Lewis has been nearer to Charles since Zandvoort, really. But conversely, the car hasn't been very good. And I come back to my point. When you dumb down the rear and you make it more stable, then all of a sudden you neutralize the car, you take away some of the front end, and Charles isn't able to be Charles Leclerc and drive the car that really only he can drive. It becomes a more balanced car, but the grip level comes down and the Ferrari isn't a quick car. So yes, Lewis is nearer to Charles, but how near is he to Charles when he's got a really pointy car to drive with an unstable rear? I don't believe he's much nearer than he was at the start of the year, because that's something that Lewis doesn't like to drive with anymore. He never really, if you think about it, he never really had to drive like that at Mercedes until 2022. And then George Russell was all over him, not all over him, but pretty much the same as the Charles thing. And so that's where we're at. I think it's difficult for Charles because he basically has to say, I want a front end above all. I don't really care about the rear. And he knows that Lewis is going to say, no, we got to have a rear because we need it for this, time management, whatever Lewis is going to say. And so you get into this sort of thing in the debrief of where they're going to go with the car. And Charles been around Ferrari long enough to know that the one thing you don't want to do is start splitting the garage too much, because then it's a real bottomless pit. And so it's a difficult act to have to balance. And I think wasn't John Elkann, I don't know, he's got some award or something at the weekend, and he was saying, we must be united as a team and win together. What does that mean? It doesn't mean anything at all. Everybody's united as a team. Everybody wants to win. Come on, say something positive. If he'd said something like, I'm here in New York getting this award, and I got to say that I love the Ferrari when it's got a really pointy front end. And if Lewis can't drive with the rear unstable, he needs to learn how to do it. Let's go, Charles. I'd be quite impressed, But it wasn't. It was one of these platitudinal, let's all work together as a team rubbish. And anyway, I just say that as an aside because it doesn't help, does it? And so, yeah, I think what Charles got to do is try to make sure he's got a car that's very sharp, very knife edgy to drive, knowing that he can do that. He will have a few moments, he'll have a few spins and a few offs, but when he gets it right, he will be unbelievably quick still. Whereas Lewis is looking for a car that's going to be a little bit more forgiving and a little bit more balanced, and allow him to do all the things that he does really well in terms of track craft and setup and prediction of where the tires are going to go. He's really good at all that. But driving a difficult, unstable car on a knife edgy limit, I don't think that's what gets Lewis out of bed anymore. And that's the difference. Dumb down the car, Lewis is going to be right there with Charles, maybe even quicker, because Charles will just lose interest.
Is that what happens next year then, Peter, to ask the exam question? Do you think Lewis will get his way and build an SF25 Ferrari car in his own image? Or do you think the likes of Elkann and Frederic Vasseur will need to continue in investing in Charles Leclerc PLC, if indeed, is that their line of least resistance to success?
No, I don't. With respect, Cameron, I think that's too simplistic. It's not as if they've got all these options and boxes they want to tick. Do we want a pointy car? Do we want a well-balanced car? Do we want this? They're going to try and build the best racing car they can, which means that the car with the most efficient downforce on the grid, in other words, downforce for drag, and with the most usable power and best fuel consumption they can have. That's what they're going to do. And they're not going to be thinking, oh, well, Charles will like this or Lewis will like that. They're just going to try and produce this great racing car and then see how it goes. But the picture I've just painted will remain. If the car is of incredibly high grip level and is amazingly aerodynamically efficient, as the McLaren has been for most of this year, then all the things I've just been talking about won't really matter, because Charles can balance it the way he wants, Lewis can balance it the way he wants, and they'll both still be very quick and win races. But if the car's not in that zone and it's about where it is now, they're going to be in the same situation with Charles wanting to get the front end, above all, the front end to work, and Lewis above all wanting to have a reasonable balance. And that's the way it is. All this would have been solved had they hired Adrian Newey, as I've said a million times. But they didn't. They decided not to. And so a little bit like Zach's master plan, we're waiting for Frederic Vasseur's master plan of this brilliant car that's going to beat the Adrian Newey Aston Martin.
Peter, to that point, is there I'm trying to understand like the root cause of Ferrari's ineptitude for so long. They won the constructors in 2008, and then 2007, Kimi snuck in the back door when Alonso and Lewis were busy taking chunks out of each other. But why have Ferrari been so bad for so long? What's so what's so hard to solve over there at Maranello? Why can't they? What is there a panacea? Is there such a thing for Maranello?
Well, I thought there was, and I thought it was Freddie Vasseur. I thought he would come in and be very clinical and very organized and have a very clean mind on how to go motor racing and say, keep your mouth shut. We're hiring Adrian Newey. Nothing else matters. That's the number one priority. And until he'd got that done, he didn't want any talk from anybody. Then when you got Adrian, you then build the team around Adrian. He brings his 30 odd people with him. And then you think about, do you want to keep Carlos Sainz? Yeah, he's doing a pretty good job, winning races, fits in well with Charles now, blah, blah, blah. We got long corner driver, short corner driver, really good combination. Let's go. But he didn't do any of that. He went the other way. Sort of wishy-washy, tried to get Adrian, but then didn't. Got Lewis Hamilton to replace Carlos Sainz. And here we are, a mess. So I don't know, I'm very disappointed that he didn't hire Adrian. And it's a bit like first corner in the sprint. Who do you blame for that? Do you blame Oscar for triggering it? Do you blame Fernando for being there? It's a bit like the commentator on the World Rally Championship when Ogier hit the tree on Friday. Was it Saturday morning? I can't remember. And he said, "Oh well, if that tree hadn't been there, that wouldn't have had a shunt." Yeah, okay. So it's a bit like that, isn't it? He should have predicted these things, and he's been around long enough, Freddie, to know what it takes to win a world championship.
Yeah.
And if you've got Adrian Newey, it's not a guarantee, but it's a pretty good chance you're going to be in the top three and you're going to win a lot of races anyway. Didn't do it. That's the problem at Ferrari. And the not winning championships in this phase, it's happening for different reasons than we've seen in the history of the sport. I mean, when they have won championships, you go back to 52, 53, they kind of persuaded the FIA to go to Formula 2 regulations because Ferrari had a Formula 2 car ready to go and Ascari blitzed it. There's 61, similar thing. They had that lovely little V6 engine ready to go, blew all the climax engines apart and won the championship in 61. 64, it was a very good time for Formula One. It was very competitive and there were a lot of teams on climax engines and there was a lot of unreliability as a result because everybody was very stretched on all these different teams that were running. And Ferrari did a good job with reliability and John Surtees did a great job in the car and won the championship. And then they fell off really badly again. Strikes were always an issue, politics. And then they hired Luca Montezemolo and they got Nicky and they realized that testing was the new thing and they built the test track at Fiorano and Nicky did 1 million Grand Prix before the season even started. And all of a sudden they had mega reliability. They had Mauro Foghieri at his very best with the flat 12 engine, transverse gearbox in 75 and won the championship easily. And then that kind of continued through to Jody in 79. The T3 was a good car, Gilles. Then it all fell away until they got Michael to come in a different era to bring in his lot. A little bit like Adrian Newey would have brought 30-odd people to Maranello. Michael brought a whole bunch of people to the race team, not necessarily to the design team, but they had Ross Brawn there on top. He was really good as well. Jean Todt, you had everybody who was good in Formula One basically was there. Adrian was still... it's not quite the Adrian Newey is now, but he wasn't bad. And that continued for 4 or 5 years. They brilliantly got Bridgestone almost exclusively, which is how Michael won those string of championships. So that accounted for that. And then they've kind of been meandering ever since with good drivers, lots of money, great facilities, but lacking on the engineering side because because the days of Mauro Foghieri kind of ended, sadly. But as good as he was, he never really adapted to ground effect. And they've never really had a decent engineering department since then. That's the problem. And they could have had it once with Adrian about 5, 6, 7 years ago now. And again, more recently, last winter, they could have got him and didn't. And Freddie's words at the time were, we're not going to hire Adrian Newey. We're going to continue to develop the car in-house, and I will be taking a bigger role on the engineering side of the car. And those words have come back to haunt him, I think.
Yeah.
And believe me, the Aston Martin Honda next year will be a very, very quick car.
Tell me what you know, Peter, because I'm hearing similar things that they'll be right there.
I don't know anything more than you. I just know that with Andy Cowell running the Honda side of things with Adrian, and Adrian doing the car, and the facilities and the money they've got, how can it not be a great Grand Prix car? They've got everything, all the ingredients are lined up. You couldn't have two better people than Andy Cowell and Adrian Newey.
Yeah. Yeah. Plus maybe Christian Horner as well now. Depending on,
but I mean, you can have Ollie Oakes. You can have a number of very good team managers in there. That's not a difficult job at all. But you've got to have a talent. But the fact that Christian may or may not be there is irrelevant. The point is, it's Andy Cowell and Adrian Newey. That's the point. You could bring Tom McCullough back from wherever they squeezed him sideways in Aston Martin, get him to run the team. He'd do the same job as a Christian Horner. And in fact, they probably should do that. But they probably won't. No. But yeah, that's where they're at, and they've got a great team because they've got Fernando Alonso, who's still very quick, and they got Lance Stroll in the other car, which is perfect because that guarantees all the money. A and B, he's going to go quite well in an Adrian car. Even he's going to be able to drive it quite well and get the odd podium, maybe even luck into a win or two. Yeah. But it's a well balanced team. It's a great team for Fernando. To have that guy in the other car is just nirvana for him.
They will go well. Speaking of next year, Peter, I don't think we've talked about the big news between this Grand Prix weekend and last was, of course, that George Russell got, in inverted commas, a multi-year contract. People are saying it's a 1+1. George Russell fans are none too pleased with that, saying that Toto should put some more respect on what George has done season to date, potentially the driver of the year alongside or just after Max Verstappen, then he's deserving of a proper multi-year, a 2+1 or a 3+1. What do you make of that, Peter? Do you think it's a sound decision for George to bake some flexibility into his contract, bearing in mind the chaos that 2027 might bring?
Totally. And I can't imagine why George Russell fans are upset, because after Singapore, if they still hadn't signed anything, what George should have been saying to Toto was, "Look, Toto, you want me to sign a 2-year deal? Forget it. I would have signed it 3 races ago. Too late now. I want a 1-year deal because I have no idea any more than you what the car's going to be like in 26. And if it's a dog, I want to be free to drive an Aston Martin or whatever is the quick car in 27. So it's a 1-year deal with an option. We can agree the money if I stay on, if you like. It's a 1-year deal. That's what I want. Take it or leave it." And he succeeded because he won Singapore. Good on him. I think it's the best deal he could possibly have for a guy of that quality, a driver of that quality, to be a free agent for 27 is an amazing achievement. And all the George fans should be delighted that he's managed to pull that off.
It's interesting that, Peter. I feel not
he
bad.
Need the security in his position in the sport.
We'll always have a drive.
What does he do? No, he knows he's going to be a Grand Prix driver every Monday morning when he wakes up. That's all he needs. As long as he's in a great team, he's fine. He doesn't need security with Toto Wolff. He needs a good Grand Prix car. And he could imagine if the Mercedes is not very good. The chassis is terrible. The engine's good, but the chassis is terrible. And McLaren are really quick and they're not, he's struggling to win Grand Prix. And he gets an offer from Aston Martin to join Fernando Alonso in the car that's winning races, the Adrian Newey car. And he signed a 2-year contract and you can't get out of it. Imagine that. You think your George Russell fans would be happy then?
No, agreed. The flexibility.
Point taken, I hope. Yeah.
No, 100%. The flexibility will be the apex.
Of course,
predator.
It's worth a lot of money to have that flexibility. If you're George Russell, if you're Franco Colapinto, you want a 50-year deal, don't you? But that's a different thing.
The problem is, Peter, if you're going to give a 1+1 and you're going to value a short-term deal, should come with more money, right? Like correspondingly. But George is getting 30 million a year, which is only a couple million more than Lando Norris is getting, and he and Oscar have themselves a long-term deal. I don't know. I feel, and especially,
I don't think George is. Sorry to interrupt. I don't think George is thinking about the money too much. Of course, he's not going to drive for 1 million, but whether it's 30, 35, 25, I'm throwing numbers glibly around, but I can't imagine the state George is in his career right now. He's that fussed about it. I think he's much more concerned about being in the right car at the right time to win a bunch of world championships. And if you win those, the money's going to come anyway. These retainers are great, but it's a bit like the sponsorship on the cars now, how much of the money on which the teams perform and build their cars actually comes from team sponsorship now? How much comes from the global platform of Formula One, whether it be TV rights, whether it be hospitality rights, signage, and all the rest of it? And so George is not stupid. He knows that he could haggle over $1 million or $2 million in his retainer. But if he's successful and he wins world championships in this Netflix, Apple era, the money he's going to earn is going to make his retainer look tiny.
Yeah.
So that's the end of that argument. As I said before, flexibility for a guy in George's position is absolutely priceless, and he's got that. So congratulations to him.
Bravo, George. That done well, sir, and he's been brilliant all season long, so he deserves all of the success, monetary or otherwise.
Well, he deserves the ability to be able to go to a decent team if Mercedes don't deliver in 26. That's what he deserves.
Yeah. Good shout.
And imagine having to turn down an Aston Martin Honda because you got to do another year at Merck.
No, he wouldn't want that.
That would be the worst nightmare. It would ruin your career, actually. It would ruin the way you would think and feel as you get into a racing car every morning.
Good shout. Go on then. You mentioned the Apple TV deal. What do you make of this, Peter? $175 million $750 million over the course of 5 years. Do you think this is a good thing for F1 or a bad thing potentially?
I think it's a great thing for F1. And it just bears out my point that the money the teams generate through sponsorship on the cars used to be like a third of the package, but I don't think it is now. And that with that sort of money coming in, plus the European money, it's, we know why they want to do as many races as possible. And that's where the money's coming in. And Apple, a great company to be with. I thought the most interesting thing about that whole press statement, though, was the stat. Correct me if I'm wrong here, Cameron, because you probably read it 3 or 4 times and I just breezed through it when I was on the first tee. And it was 47%, I think, are under 25. Is that right? And a large percentage of those are female. Is that right?
So I don't know the age demographic. That sounds about right. But I know that 40% of the existing viewers are women, which is brand new for Formula One, right? It's a change, a paradigm shift.
Yeah. Well, I see it the other way. I see it as, wow, 60% of the viewers aren't women. And wow, over 50% are over 25. That's the interesting thing. There's a lot of people out there, a lot of middle-aged males who, and let's not get into the male-female thing, because to me, it's kind of irrelevant. Everybody's, the same in terms of how they should be treated in demographics. But in terms of the age group, I thought it was fascinating that only 47%, under 50%, were relatively young. I thought it'd be something like 70% are under 25 and 30% of this dying older age. That's why we're putting so much emphasis on Netflix and having, guys wave the checkered flag that nobody's ever heard of, and having 2 Apaches and 5 Chinooks fly over when we could have had the Red Arrows or some decent proper American thing. All those things that you imagine, oh, well, that must be the young generation. But still, it's under 50%. I'm amazed by that. I'm encouraged too. Because it means for old fogies like us, there are a lot of people out there that still actually think about Watkins Glen or Dallas Grand Prix or Jim Clark. I thought it was really encouraging from that point of view. I was staggered that it was such a small percentage.
Really? I don't think, but we don't need much, the grizzled F1 vets, Peter, don't need much food or light or sun. We're going to be here anyway. We've been here all our lives. There's no going away. Netflix comes and goes, and whoever the drivers retire and new ones come. We'll be here anyway, so they don't need to give us much food and water, do they? But Netflix and the new demographic is like that. That's why I think they don't get. I agree with you. I'm quite surprised, but
yeah, I'm not decrying the way Liberty have gone about catering for the younger generation, nor am I decrying anymore the way they go about catering for the older generation, because they're making a lot more available from the archive, and they have a lot more feel for the past, I think, than Bernie ever did or showed. Bernie had feel for the past, but he never wanted to display it. That's all good. I'm just amazed that it's not more than 47%, that's all, because there doesn't seem to be any effort at all, really, to cater for the existing older generation. It's all focused towards the young generation.
Yeah. 1,000%.
That's my point, and I don't want to make any more point than that. It's just like, wow, that's interesting. There's a lot of people out there that still love Formula One.
Yeah, they're not going anywhere, Peter. Not
Yeah.
not the grizzled F1 vets, the purists. They'll still be around.
I think, but I think I don't think they're purists. I think they're people that, I mean, a purist will watch every session, every race, and will look at every idiosyncrasy of practice and performance. I don't think it's that. I think it's just that it's become kind of fashionable to think of Formula One only in terms of Netflix, the icing on the cake, the glamour, the luxury, the girlfriends, the wives, skimming the surface of what it's all about. Oh, that was a boring race, no overtakes. This was a great race, five overtakes for the lead and 4 crashes, much better race. All that sort of rather childish, materialistic way of looking at Formula One has become the norm, as far as I can see. And very little of it is focused on tire deg or load, lateral load, weight distribution, whatever you want to talk about that's significant that weekend, that explains why one car did the job and another didn't, or one way one driver is using the steering, the brakes and the throttle different from another. And yet these stats show that stuff is still important and people do still care about that. And that's very encouraging, I think. Very encouraging for the likes of yourself who like to delve deeper, well below the superficial surface of it all, Cameron. We know that about you.
Yeah.
I'm not being cynical. I'm just laughing because of the look on your face. That's all.
Sometimes, Peter. It's go on then, Mr. Windsor. Been far too generous with your time as always. As we round third base, let me get a prediction. Mexican Grand Prix is up next. Who have you got?
Well, don't Ferrari always go quite well there in the high altitude? I think they do. Didn't Carlos win there quite recently? I think he did, didn't he?
This is a different Ferrari, isn't it, Peter? I mean,
is it? I don't know.
But
well, it's a long straight, and it's high altitude. But that effectively means, what does that mean? I think DRS is less effective, something like that. And they obviously have trimming the cars. The car's a bit lighter, and they dance around more. So that's going to be good for Max. It's going to be good for Charles. And let me think about it. What are the great corners in Mexico? Got the long straight, you got that sort of chicane at the end, then you got another chicane, then you got the hairpin, then you got some quick corners, haven't you? Those S's through there. That'll be the best bit of the lap. And very important change of direction there. Usually a few shunts there in practice, aren't there? So sort of Alex Albonish type section of road. So yeah, Max for sure will be good there. I can't imagine why they won't be good around there. No. And I think Charles will be good. And McLaren, of course, will have a very good car all round in terms of reliability. I'll say reliability. I mean, the Lando thing in Zandvoort, but generally speaking, pretty reliable. But will they get the best of the car through those S's, which lead onto a straight? So they're really good S's there. They'll be good through the stadium section. But yeah, I would say, barring anything stupid, reliability-wise, I can't see how Max won't be in great shape for Mexico.
I concur, Mr. Windsor. It's going to be interesting, right? They have,
I suppose, and the most interesting thing then will be: will Oscar have one of his weekends or not? When he blows Lando away.
Yeah,
and that's that. I suppose we've had enough bad races from Oscar now. We've had Baku, we've had Singapore, and now Austin. That's 3. So any more, and we know there's a real problem going on. I'm interested to know what he actually, I mean, again, we were talking about this a couple of cam chats ago, weren't we, about the people they really need to interview after the race. And the guy, again, we really needed to interview was Oscar Piastri after that race, wasn't it?
Yeah, 100%.
As soon as he got out of the car, balaclava off, microphone in front of him. What happened, Oscar? Why were you so slow?
Yeah,
it would have been really interesting to see his reaction. But he probably would have wiped the interviewer out and knocked the mic out of the way.
No, they asked him, Peter.
But a bit late there. He had time to think about it, didn't he?
Yeah, fair. I mean, he gets a couple of seconds.
No point going to that pen thing. Forget about that. They've had time to be briefed by those people holding the recorders. They're never going to say anything. I'm talking about proper interviews.
Yeah, but he was. I'm trying to think of his answer.
I bet he said, well, we didn't really get the best from the car this weekend. We just weren't there.
Correct. Yeah, he did say he did. But then he said,
Wow, that's an earth-shattering comment.
but then he also said, he was,
and we got hurt by not running in the sprint. They hurt us with data as well. I bet he said that because he also lost time with the. I don't think he worried quite as much about the graining as Lando, but he lost time. He had good graining anyway.
I think you're right, Peter. The sprint, the lack of running in the sprint hurt them, and they went too conservative on the ride height, didn't they? But what concerned me from Oscar's perspective isn't that it when he was asked the question like what happened, it was nothing in particular. I was just slow. Like,
well, there you go. At least he's honest,
bonkers.
Isn't he?
But that's incredible.
But then the next question is why?
That's
why were you
bonkers.
slow?
Yeah, that's incredible. So now
and I wonder if they ask him that.
No, they didn't. No follow-ups. No follow-ups.
But then we got George Russell on the radio saying, Oscar looks pretty slow.
Yeah.
And there's George who's 2 seconds behind Oscar, going even slower. What's that all about? Well, we didn't think the car go very well. We're just stuck here. Nothing we can do.
This is bonkers. I understand.
Well, it's modern Formula One, isn't it? They just put themselves in these mindsets.
But that's astounding, Peter. Again, I'll bookend our soliloquy with this. The stat is, over the first 9 races this season, Oscar Piastri accrued 4 poles and 5 wins. Over the most recent 10, he's only accrued 1 pole and 2 race wins. That is. I understand that there are underlying things like variables that have changed. That Max now has himself a car that's capable of winning racing chat. But that in and of itself, and no podiums in the last 3. I don't understand what's going on.
Well, it all started in Baku, didn't it?
Yeah,
and it was all a function of Oscar as becoming a longer corner driver than he's ever been in his life. I don't know why McLaren aren't on top of that, because and I'm not kidding you, the beginning of his McLaren career, he definitely was turning in earlier than Lando Norris, and he had definitely had a feel for getting in early, and it's all gone because of, I guess, the comparison of telemetry between the 2 drivers. And he's looking at what Lando does, where he brakes, where he turns in, gets the power on. That's how they gauge one another. And so his driving has sort of morphed into the Lando style. And as a result, he's no longer the very natural Oscar Piastri that he used to be. And when you throw a lot of brick walls at him, as you do in Baku, and you're loading the car up on exit much more than, say, a Max does, where he's doing all the work in the rotation point, and you hit the wall, then you're going to lose confidence, you're going to be confused, you're going to jump the start, you're going to do a million things. Insane. And that's what happened. And he didn't, and he's not learning from that.
Oh, Peter.
Well, it's difficult for him to learn from it now, because how can he learn? He's leading the championship. He's on tenterhooks as to what's going to happen next. Lando's got momentum. He's got, on the 1 minute, he's got Zach with his arm around saying, don't worry, mate, it's going to be okay. And the other side of the coin, he's got Zach with his arm around Lando saying, don't worry, mate, it's going to be okay. And then he's got the whole confusing thing of Singapore and what, from his perception, went wrong at Singapore with Lando. And then he's got the weird thing at Austin where he never really felt comfortable in the car, no matter what he did. And then he did what he felt was a normal racing maneuver to get that guy that nearly took him out in Singapore. And the whole thing erupted and they're both out of the race.
Oh my gosh, Mr. Windsor. Let me ask you this.
And so it's a messy situation now from which to extract himself. All he can do is think about the very simple basics and go back to 100% basics, which is, I'm leading the world championship. That's good. If the world stops revolving tomorrow, I'm world champion. First point. Second point, if Lando doesn't finish any races, I've got a very good chance of being world champion, but I do have the Max Verstappen thing to deal with. Third point, I need to finish as near to Max as I possibly can in every race from here on. I'm not going to race Lando. I'm going to race Max. That's going to be my vision of how, if Max is brilliantly quick, I've got to be right behind in P2. And that inevitably will put me ahead of Lando. But I don't want to start racing Lando. I don't want to have anything to do with Lando. I'm going to focus 100% on beating Max Verstappen, racing Max. I've got a very good racing car, 0.4. That's how he needs to do it, in my opinion. And he may well do that. He's a clear thinking, normally he's a clear thinking Aussie grit guy that gets on with it. And so he's got all those potentials to do that. But if he starts getting into the McLaren fight now with Lando, it's going to get worse and worse and worse, in my opinion.
Peter, final one. If Max were to overwhelm the 40-point gap between him and Oscar, would it be a bigger fumble from Oscar than was Mark Webber's in 2012? Or 10 even. I'm mixing up my years, aren't I? 2010 was the first one.
Yeah, I mean, Mark, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, with Abu Dhabi that year, I think he
went into it in the
didn't
lead.
he pit early because he just wanted to cover Seb? I think that was what it was. And I think that's probably what he'd be saying to Oscar. Exactly what I've just said. Don't fall into the trap of relating what you're doing now to Lando Norris. Relate it to Max Verstappen and what they're doing at Red Bull. And I think if Mark had done his own thing, he probably would have won the championship in Abu Dhabi. But because the whole Red Bull thing was, cover one another and, you got to think of the team, that's where it went wrong. I think there was too much thinking and not enough pure racing. I think it was something along those lines.
Yeah, he did. I think it was to cover off. No, you
was it Alonso? Or
Alonso. I was going to say Alonso, to be fair.
Yeah, something like that. Maybe it was Alonso. Yeah, but I don't know. I just think because Mark's been through that situation, he'll be quite good in Oscar's ear between races as to how to think it through. He may not agree with what I've just said, but I'll be surprised if he doesn't, because it's pretty, I think for a real racer, you see the vision of where you've got to be. And from Oscar's point of view, he can't lose sight of the fact that he's got to race Max Verstappen now. And if he does that, he's going to be taking care of Lando anyway. But don't get too focused on what's going on in the McLaren garage, because that'll spiral downwards from Oscar's perspective. It may help Lando. And beyond that, they won't be focusing on the real problem, which is Max Verstappen and Red Bull.
Chaos. How do you?
So it's good. We've got a championship now, and it's great that we have this dynamic, and let's hope it continues this way, because it's great. I mean, for Max to pull it off would be one of the greatest recoveries ever, I think, in the history of the sport. Yes, we've had drivers do similar things in the past, but in the past, there have been other factors that are more important than they are today, like unreliability, like safety, like a lot of other things that have come into play. But here today, with the level of reliability we have and the safety level we have and the ability to make mistakes and not damage the car, to be able to come from where Max was, even to where he is now, is amazing. But if he can continue that, it will be probably the greatest recovery in the history of Formula One.
Or the history of sports entire, Peter.
Well, yeah. It could well be. I mean, obviously, every sport has its moments like that, whether it be golf coming through on the last round, whether it be cricket, whether it be football, even coming back from 4-0 and winning in the final penalty shootout, whatever it is. Every sport has its thing. But if Max can pull this off, it will be bigger than anything that Netflix could have created. This will be the event of all time.
And on that bombshell, Mr. Windsor, you've been a legend as always. If you enjoy, as I do, the legendary Peter D. Windsor insights, and you are not subscribed to the Peter Windsor YouTube channel, then what are you doing with your life? Shortly thereafter, if you ingest all of your F1 content by dint of your favourite podcasting platform, it is the Short Corners podcast. That is the pick to click. If you're watching this on the YouTubes, do me a favour, like, comment, share, and subscribe. If you're listening on a podcasting platform, then it's 5 stars every single time. And a follow, if you would. Mr. Windsor, you've been a legend as per usual. I appreciate your God-tier insight, more than words can convey. Between now and next time. Ladies and gentlemen of the F1 jury, the prosecution rests. No further questions, Your Honour.